Charlie Kirk's death was a moment that shocked his supporters, his colleagues, and even those who followed politics from a distance. He had been a constant presence in the conservative movement for more than a decade, known as the founder of Turning Point USA, and as someone who shaped political debate among young people in America. When news broke that Charlie Kirk had been shot and killed while appearing at an event in Utah, it immediately set off a wave of reactions. Supporters grieved publicly, critics expressed their surprise, and political leaders began preparing tributes. The suddenness of the loss meant that his funeral would not only be a private family farewell, but also a major national moment. The funeral service was arranged at State Farm Stadium in Glendale, Arizona, a location chosen because of the sheer number of people expected to attend. Organizers knew that thousands of mourners, friends, and supporters would gather, and that prominent political figures would also be present. It was not a quiet or hidden event. It was a large-scale memorial designed to give the public an opportunity to say goodbye. Tens of thousands came to the stadium, and the coverage confirmed that it had the atmosphere of both a personal farewell and a national gathering. Security was visible throughout, as local police and federal agencies worked to ensure the safety of the attendees. Reporters covering the event noted that the crowd was unlike anything usually seen at a funeral, which showed the degree of influence Charlie Kirk had built during his career. The presence of political leaders added to the gravity of the moment. Donald Trump attended and spoke at the memorial, as did Vice President J.D. Vance and his wife, Usha. Their speeches were tributes to Kirk's political work and his ability to mobilize young people. Supporters saw their presence as a sign of respect for the impact Kirk had made in conservative circles. News outlets highlighted the level of political attention given to the event, pointing out that it is rare for sitting or former national leaders to appear at a memorial of someone who was not in public office. The funeral was not just about mourning, but about acknowledging the legacy of someone whose work touched millions. But despite the presence of political leaders and the size of the crowd, the central and most powerful image of that day was not the speeches or the applause. It was Erica Kirk, Charlie Kirk's wife, who stood out as the emotional heart of the memorial. Cameras captured her throughout the day, and she became the focus of news reports and social media commentary. Her grief was raw and visible. From the moment she entered the stadium, she carried herself with the weight of someone who had not only lost a husband, but also lost a partner in both life and mission. Attendees later described the atmosphere as shifting whenever Erica appeared, because everyone knew that beyond the politics and the public discourse, this was a personal tragedy most deeply felt by her. The most unforgettable moment came when Erica approached Charlie's open casket. The casket had been placed in a way that allowed mourners to see him one final time, and Erica walked toward it with slow, deliberate steps. Once there, she leaned over, touched it, and almost immediately broke down into tears. She cried uncontrollably, her voice breaking as she spoke words that could be heard in recordings. "I love you, I love you, I love you." Those words, repeated again and again, echoed through the silence of the space before the crowd responded with applause meant as comfort. Some who were there later said it was difficult to watch because of how personal and unfiltered the moment was. Others said it was important because it revealed the human cost of what had happened. The transcript and recordings from the funeral showed that Erica said more than just private words to her husband. She also turned to address the crowd, connecting Charlie's memory to the political movement he had built. She said, "Mr. President, my husband loved you. To everyone listening tonight across America, the movement my husband built will not die." Her words carried both grief and determination. She was crying, but she was also making clear that Charlie's work would continue. This was not only a widow's farewell, but also a statement to supporters that she intended to help carry on what her husband had started. The repetition of "I love you" became the emotional core of her tribute. In the footage, she seemed unable to stop herself from saying it over and over. It was not a prepared line. It was the instinctive expression of someone who had lost the person closest to them. Each repetition made the moment heavier for the crowd because it stripped away the layers of ceremony and revealed nothing but human pain. When she spoke those words, the audience knew they were witnessing something unguarded. For many, it was the most memorable moment of the entire funeral. Applause followed her tribute. People inside the stadium responded to her words not with silence, but with affirmation. Some clapped in support, some shouted back words of encouragement. The mix of grief and applause reflected the unique nature of this funeral. It was not only a space of mourning, but also a gathering of people who saw themselves as part of a larger cause. News reports confirmed that the applause was loud enough to fill the stadium, showing the solidarity the crowd felt with Erica in that moment. Media outlets covered Erica's grief extensively. Newspapers and television channels described her as the emotional centerpiece of the memorial. They quoted her speech, replayed the footage of her crying at the casket, and highlighted the way she tied her husband's personal memory to his public mission. Social media platforms carried clips that were shared millions of times. Some users expressed sympathy, others praised her strength, and many said the rawness of her emotions was difficult to watch but impossible to ignore. Across the spectrum, people agreed that Erica's uncontrollable crying had become the defining image of the funeral. The symbolism of her moment at the casket was clear. In one sense, it was the private grief of a wife losing her husband. In another sense, it was the public grief of a movement losing its founder. The tears bridged both realities. For supporters, Erica's words reinforced their belief that Charlie's legacy would continue. For observers, her grief revealed the personal toll behind the headlines. It reminded everyone that beyond the debates and the political speeches, a family was suffering an irreplaceable loss. That dual meaning is why the footage was reported on so widely. It was a private reaction that carried public weight. In the days that followed, coverage of the funeral often returned to Erica's breakdown. Commentators noted that her repeated words of love were both heartbreaking and memorable. Analysts pointed out that by publicly saying, "The movement my husband built will not die," she had positioned herself as someone who might take a more visible role in the future of Turning Point USA. Some reports mentioned that she had already been active in related initiatives and that her leadership role was being discussed within the organization. While the focus remained on her grief, the reporting also acknowledged that her presence at the funeral signaled continuity for the movement Charlie Kirk had founded. The coverage also raised questions about privacy and publicity. Some people asked whether it was right for such an intimate moment, a wife crying at her husband's casket, to be filmed and shared so widely. Others responded that because Erica herself had chosen to speak publicly and had posted parts of the memorial, it was appropriate for the media to cover it. The debate reflected a larger issue in modern society: the line between private mourning and public documentation. In this case, the footage was part of the official record of the event, and it quickly became central to how the public remembered the funeral. For many supporters, Erica's uncontrollable crying symbolized the human side of political violence. Charlie Kirk had been killed in a targeted shooting, and while the headlines focused on the investigation and the suspect, Erica's moment at the casket reminded people of what had been lost beyond the political sphere. Her words and tears spoke more powerfully than any press release or official statement could. They showed that the cost of violence was not abstract but deeply personal. Even as news coverage continued with updates about the legal case, the charges against the suspect, and the political responses, Erica's grief remained the emotional anchor of the story. It was replayed again and again on television and online. Supporters said it was a reminder of the love Charlie had in his personal life, not only the influence he had in public. Critics who disagreed with his politics still recognized that the rawness of the moment transcended ideology. The image of a wife weeping at her husband's casket carried a universal power. In the closing days after the funeral, reflections about the event often ended with Erica's words. Commentators said that her tribute combined vulnerability and resolve. She had lost her husband, but she made clear that she would not let his work disappear. Her tears showed love, while her statements showed commitment. This combination turned her moment of grief into a moment of legacy. It was a farewell, but it was also a promise. When looking back at Charlie Kirk's funeral, people will remember the scale of the crowd, the presence of political leaders, and the atmosphere of a national event. But above all, they will remember Erica Kirk crying uncontrollably at her husband's casket, repeating, "I love you," again and again. That moment cut through the noise, cut through politics, and reminded everyone watching that behind every public figure is a private life, a family, and a love story. For Erica, the funeral was not only a stage but also the most painful day of her life. For the public, it became the defining image of Charlie Kirk's farewell,